A lot has been said about the exodus of the Israelites. In this video, I'm going to approach it and explore it from a different angle, from a standpoint very rarely used. My aim is first to dig out the main reasons that made Pharaoh, the king of Israel, so unwilling to let the children of Israel go. Secondly, I would like to show how Egypt, through a long period of time, was set out to fall. Lastly, we shall draw out lessons that we can use in our daily life. For the scripture says that what has been written for our instruction. For a better and profound understanding of our subject matter, it is essential that we go back to the stories of Abraham and Joseph. Genesis 15 provides a tale of God speaking to Abraham, whose descendants would live in a foreign land for 4 centuries and be made slaves. After that, God would come set them free and execute his judgment on the people they would serve. Many years later, Abram's descendants found themselves in Egypt through Joseph's promotion. At Pharaoh's commands, Joseph settled his brothers in the fertile land of Goshen, the base part of the land where they receive the task of shepherding Pharaoh's flocks as depicted in Genesis 47. During Joseph's tenure as the second in charge in the land of Egypt, he introduces certain policies during the time of famine. He buys lands from the Egyptians in exchange for food. Sometimes later, most of the land belongs to Pharaoh, and the Egyptians work for him. Joseph acquired all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh because the Egyptians sold all their properties, all their fields, on account of the famine that weighed upon them. So, the whole land became Pharaoh's property. At the time of the Exodus, the Israelites had been slaves for hundreds of years, working in various fields in Egypt. As I elaborate, it is important for us to keep in mind the elements I've just mentioned. Moses returns to Egypt. He meets Pharaoh. He presents God's demands that he is to release the children of Israel and set them free. But the Pharaoh does not listen to him. He actually makes the task of the Israelites even more difficult. First, let us examine the reason why the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, refused Moses' demand. As the first reason, we have the workforce reason. When Moses goes to Pharaoh to request the release of Israel, Egypt is a superpower built, maintained, and developed on the back of a considerable amount of foreign labor. By this time, Egypt is dependent on the Israelites' workforce. The Israelites have been employed as foremen, bricklayers, carpenters, and heirs. The Egyptian construction industry relies heavily on the manpower of their slaves. Letting these slaves go would deprive the land of a very important workforce that was used to not only build new infrastructures, but also to maintain the existing ones. The Egyptian kingdom, just as any other, counts on the involvement of other people. In many cases, foreign workers for its professional stability and prosperity. There were jobs that only foreigners were willing to or forced to perform. Today, it is evident that multiple construction projects in places such as Dubai, Doha, etc. are propelled by a foreign workforce. In the beginning of Australia, a lot of German artisans were brought into the land. Even at higher levels, the role and impact of foreigners in the building and development of a nation cannot be undermined. The USA used the service of former Nazi German scientists to boost the multiple scientific projects, with Werner von Braun, Ernest Starlinger, and Kirk de Bos being the most famous ones. Israel's women also were probably key to the upkeep of Egyptian households as maids, helpers, etc. This is attested by the fact that Moses' mom played the role of nanny to Moses for Pharaoh's daughter. It is logical to assume that this was not an isolated case, but that other Egyptians also used the services of Jewish female slaves to maintain their houses. Understanding the importance of slaves in the building and maintenance of his country, Pharaoh could not be willing to let the Israelites go. We also need to consider that letting one group of slaves go could ultimately embolden slaves belonging to other ethnicities and nations to seek their release too. The story of the Exodus confirms that. Not only the Israelites left, but with them were other peoples. For it is written that there was a multitude of people that left Egypt with Israel. The loss in manpower was too great for any leader of any nation to accept, knowing it would result in the fall of their nation. Without its manpower that contributed to the erection of all the splendid buildings that Egypt was praised for, the kingdom of Pharaoh would cease being a superpower. That was inconceivable, let alone acceptable. The second set of reason is the economic and food security reason. A lot of manual work that the Egyptian economy benefited from was performed by slaves. The Israelites were shepherds tending flocks for various purposes: milk, wool, or food. Egyptians were not your typical shepherds, as they did not keep cattle and sheep for food. The departure of Israelites would considerably reduce the production of milk and wool, a situation that is not good for any country. In the time of Joseph, Egypt had been so prosperous that while famine struck the region and other nations struggled to eat, Egypt sold food to neighboring countries, so making a lot of money. Slaves played a big role in that prosperity and food sufficiency. Slaves contributed to the economic growth of Egypt and its dominance. Egypt had too much to lose economically in the case of the exodus of slaves, Israelites, and others. Among the reasons that made Pharaoh refuse Moses' request, we can also find the military reason. One of the things that makes a nation powerful is its army. This was the case for Egypt. Its army played a big role in keeping slaves in subjection while casting an air of dominance on other countries. The departure of slaves would signal the weakness of Egypt. If it could not keep an armed slave in the country and get overcome, how could it remain powerful and feared by other nations? That would expose Egypt to attacks from without and from within. Now let's explore the political aspects of Pharaoh's refusal. When you lose control over slaves in your land, that presents the perfect opportunity to any vassal state to rebel against your authority. Letting slaves go would hand a golden gift to Egypt's vassal kingdoms to seek their freedom too, further weakening Egypt. Now let us consider the pharaonic reason. Pharaoh was regarded as a god in Egypt. Because of the powerful influence of Egypt over other nations, we could fairly assume that his deity must have been accepted in other places as well. The figure of the Pharaoh contributed a lot in the stability of the Egyptian religious structure. The ripple effect of the liberation and exodus of slaves could only damage the Egyptian religious frame and crush the image of a divine Pharaoh. The Pharaoh would be seen as a mere mortal. After going through the various reasons that made the release of slaves inconceivable and unacceptable, let us examine the way Egypt was positioned to fall. In the beginning of this video, I draw attention to the tale of God speaking to Abraham about his descendant being enslaved in a foreign land and the punishment that God would inflict on that nation. We can see that the only unnamed actor in this scenario is the nation where the Israelites would be enslaved. Later on, we discover that it is Egypt, whose fate has already been stated. It all started with Joseph, a descendant of Abraham, entering Egypt as a slave. Egypt is a pagan nation swimming deeply and totally in idol worship. The promotion of Joseph occurs in quite an unusual way. Despite all the wise men, the priests, the magicians, the sorcerers, you name it, Pharaoh's dreams cannot be interpreted except by a Jewish slave who believes in Yahweh. This instance shows how Yahweh is being set up as greater than the gods of the Egyptians. It is a clear message to the Egyptian elite. Once in power, the former Jewish slave displays skills and wisdom unmatched in Egypt. He outclasses the council of wise men to the point of being referred to as a father to the Pharaoh. This must have changed how the Egyptian elite, who knew about Joseph's origin, viewed Jews. At the arrival of his brothers, the king requests that the sons of Jacob tend his flocks. That speaks volume about his perception of the Jews at that moment. The king had people who tended his flock before. What made him ask for the service of Joseph's brothers? Joseph's performance and credibility. When the Jews became slaves, their good reputation must have stuck. With a good reputation and a good performance comes the reliance on the workers. Sooner or later, that reliance turns into dependence, as the employer tends to abandon the work, the knowledge, and the skills to the employee. We can see that in the cases of Potiphar and Pharaoh in their dealings with Joseph. That can make the employee indispensable. When the exodus comes, Egypt relies heavily on slaves. It cannot function properly without them. It cannot maintain its status without slaves. Egypt had been set up, but the plan had been executed slowly, thoroughly, for a long period of time. In the last part of this video, we will attempt to draw out life lessons that may be useful to us in our daily lives. This is the main reason why the Bible gives us this story. Egypt's idolatry seems to have gone unnoticed by God. Yet I believe that God's judgment on Egypt is not only because of the slavery of the Jews, but also because of its idolatry. God spoke of the judgment before the slavery. Here we can learn that God's apparent inaction against the sin is not an indication of the absence of future judgment. The way Egypt becomes dependent on its slaves also teaches us a lesson. Dependence on something or someone usually happens subtly without our realization. Moreover, contrary to popular belief, it is not only the poor and the have-nots that are dependent on the rich and the haves. The opposite is also true. We create our dependence on others by delegating too much, too often, for too long, to the point that we lose the skills and the practice of the task that we ask other people to perform for us. This goes the same for machines, AI, on whatever we use to perform tasks that we could ourselves do. Arrogance also makes us dependent on others, since we believe that we are above certain types of jobs, certain types of positions. We may also become dependent on others because of religious reasons. The Egyptians considered being a shepherd an abomination because of religious reasons. Too much help, too much assistance can also make someone too dependent. It seems proper to say something about reputation. Joseph's good reputation is based on his good performance and his character. That gives him credibility. When his brothers come, his words have weight before the king. By his good reputation, Joseph paved the way for his brothers. From Joseph, we can learn that wherever we go, whatever we do, we represent not only ourselves, but also those who will come after us. We can make it either easier for them with a good reputation or harder for them with a bad reputation. Obviously, there is a lot more that can be unpacked using these video texts. However, it is better to stop here and let everyone ponder over what has been discussed in this video. Thank you for having watched it. Till next time, may the peace of God fill your mind and your heart.